Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast as we are going to be looking ahead to this upcoming weekend in the NFL and giving our 5 picks against the spread. Through 2 weeks, we have done a pretty good job, all things considered, going 4-1 in back-to-back weeks, hoping to get that undefeated stretch there, but I think that this is a pretty tough weekend in terms of sort of weeding out which games are a little bit trappish, and we're going to be walking a fine line here, but we're going to try and, continue on the positive stretch here and continue to add to that positive record. So without further ado, getting into the picks here, my number one bet of the weekend is the Ravens -1 on the road against the Dallas Cowboys. This is a very interesting matchup between two of the, Super Bowl contenders headed into this season. I myself am a lot lower on the Cowboys, and I have been headed into this season. I don't have them as a playoff team, and this is a situation where, as much as they need to bounce back, the Ravens are currently 0-2 and can't really afford to fall into a hole in that AFC North that is obviously ultra competitive. And neither one of these teams looked all that great this past weekend. The fact that Gardner Minshew was able to carve up Baltimore's secondary last week is a concern. Now, still not sure about the status of rookie cornerback Nate Wiggins, that he will be an important part to this for Baltimore. But ultimately, when I look at this game, I think that the Ravens are going to be able to put up points against the Cowboys. I'm not sure if Dallas is going to have any chance to really survive against what is an excellent Baltimore front seven. I think that this is already a Cowboys team that I think is very lackluster on the offensive line, has struggled to really get much out of their running game up to this point. Last week, the Ravens completely shut down the Raiders' rushing attack. Not that, that either is necessarily an elite group, but I think they are going to... This is a desperation game to some degree for the Ravens, where the Cowboys, they do have a little bit more wiggle room. The Eagles, who are their top competition in the NFC East, also have a difficult matchup against the Saints that we are also going to be previewing here. But this is a spot where I think that Baltimore's defense is going to show out once again, and I think that they're just going to be able to get themselves out to a lead and run it out from there. Now, you can say to me that that's what they should have done last week against the Raiders, and they were unable to close the door there. But again, I just feel like this is a team that has really good coaching under John Harbaugh. A lot of losses on that defensive side of the ball. Mike McDonald leaving may have shown a little bit more flaws on that defensive side for the Ravens, but I think that this is essentially a pick'em game, and I cannot see the Ravens going down 0-3 up to this point in the season. I think that they are in need of a wake-up call, and I do think that they will bounce back this week against the Cowboys. I have the Lions going into Arizona and covering -3. I've been very vocal about the fact that I am a believer in this Cardinals team, and I did pick them to make the playoffs, but this is a situation where the Lions, while they're still 1-1 and they're not in any sort of a bad position, their offense has been massively underwhelming up to this point in the season, and I think that in order to get back on track, what they are going to do is get back to sort of their roots, what made them so excellent last year, which was running the ball. That's sort of that hard-nosed Dan Campbell strategy. They have one of, if not the best offensive line in the NFL, and I think it's just going to be too much for the Cardinals to handle in this game. Now, it's a spread of 3. I think it's going to be close, and this could be a game that ends up nearing that push category there, but I think that ultimately the Cardinals defense, as much as I like Zach Gannon, I continue to sing his praises, that I think he's a great head coach and I think he's a great defensive mind. I just don't think that the personnel is going to be able to match up man-to-man with what the Lions can provide for you up front. You establish that game up up front initially. And then from there, once you get that going, Jared Goff is one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL at operating out of play action. So I think that that's something that they can capitalize on. I will say Lions secondary hasn't necessarily taken the steps that I was hoping to see headed into this season, but at least they have, elite production right now from that front seven. Aiden Hutchinson on an absolute tear through 2 weeks. If you were to pick a defensive player of the year based off of 2 weeks, would probably go to Hutchinson. That's of course not how these awards go, and it's a little bit unfair to say that, but I think that talent for talent, this is going to be a game where the Cardinals, who are going to be frisky this year and are going to make things interesting continuously, they're coming off of what is just a beatdown against the Rams. They're feeling good about themselves, while the Lions, that Dan Campbell is going to have them ready to make a statement, and that's what I think they're going to do on the road in Arizona this upcoming weekend. The Chargers on the road against the Pittsburgh Steelers. This is another very short line. I believe it moved a little bit in favor of the Chargers. I think this might have opened at 2.5 points if I'm not mistaken. Another very close game here, but I think that the Steelers, I don't view them necessarily as the talent of a 3-0 team, but what I do know is that defense is capable of being a 3-0 worthy unit, and I think they're going to cause problems for the Chargers. The Chargers are off to a good start, being 2-0, but they have beaten the Raiders and the Panthers up to this point. Jim Harbaugh is an excellent coach, and he is already proving to be a difference maker for this Chargers team. But ultimately, when I look at the Steelers, I think this is a situation where they are going to take the running game away from the Chargers, and then at that point, it is up to Justin Herbert, who was on the injury report earlier this week, is clearly dealing with that foot issue stemming back to training camp. And I just don't think that the Chargers have the playmakers on the perimeter to be able to make the Steelers pay in this situation. I think that the Steelers are going to come in, try and muck things up on the ground. And listen, I'm not the biggest fan necessarily of that offense either. You're looking at 1 touchdown scored, I believe, between 2 weeks for the Steelers en route to being 2-0. It's not like they are going to lay it on you, but I think if the Steelers get out to a hot start here, this is another situation where I think that they are just going to be able to bleed some more clock and take away the strength of this Chargers team, which is the run, force them into a little bit more of a passing-friendly game, and I'm not sure. I think that this is a game where the Steelers, we picked them last week against the Broncos. Was it pretty? Absolutely not, but I think that they get the job done once again. Preface this a little bit earlier. The Eagles on the road in New Orleans playing in the Superdome. I always have a very tough time sort of betting on a team that is riding high, playing against a team that it feels like everybody is now out on. And that's the situation at hand here for the Eagles and the Saints. Saints have looked almost flawless through 2 weeks. Meanwhile, the Eagles are coming off of what was a national embarrassment on Monday Night Football against the Falcons, where they gave that one away. But the reality is, I think that the Eagles have a pretty glaring weakness, and that's on the defensive side of the ball. I think you can run on them. And what we saw is Alvin Kamara still has it. And what happens there as well is the fact, and we talked about this with Jared Goff in the preview of that Cardinals game, where I think that the Saints will be able to establish the run once again, and then is when you sort of get the threat of Derek Carr and that deep ball. They have somebody like Rashid Shaheed that makes opposing defenses just stuck in this middle ground where you want to step up and help in the run game, but also when you have somebody who can stretch the field. Derek Carr has hit Shaheed on deep bombs in each of the past 2 weeks that it's either way a little bit of a lose-lose for you there. And I just think that this is going to be a situation. I understand the line, I think, moved a solid 4 points from week 1 to week 2, where I believe when this first opened a week out, it was the Eagles being favored by -2.5. So, again, I don't love necessarily riding with the momentum in that type of sense. I feel like you can set yourself up for some traps, but this is a situation where I think the Saints have a strength that can go directly against Philadelphia's weakness of that run game. And I think that this is going to be an opportunity where the Saints offense is going to be able to shine once again. So I'm taking them -2.5. And then game 5 here, we did excellent last week through the first 4. That 5th game is always where things get a little bit sketchy. We had the Jaguars against the Browns last week. That's what failed us. This is another gross game to bet on, and it is the Chicago Bears on the road against Indianapolis. Now, as we were live recording this show, I just checked during the break, and it is official that Keenan Allen has been ruled out for this game. That's not a great sign for the Bears, as I'm going to now sit here and try and convince you to take them. But this is more so than anything just about the fact that I am such a believer in that Bears defense. I think that they're one of the elites in the league. What they did against Houston last week should have been a statement that everybody should now be aware of. And this is a situation where Anthony Richardson, while we can all understand that the ceiling is 100% there and the physical gifts are very prevalent, I think that the decision-making and the inaccuracy is going to come back to hurt him. You have an excellent secondary there in Chicago that I think can throw out a bunch of different looks that are going to confuse the Colts. There was a clip of Jalen Johnson explaining sort of the misdirection in the secondary that he had when he was on a podcast with Richard Sherman. So I think that this is a group that's just going to be able to cause fits for that Colts offense. I think that, last week we saw Indianapolis run for something like 130, 150 yards, something along those lines against the Packers and still only put up 3 points. Now, on the other end, Caleb Williams and this Bears offense has not been able to make its mark yet up to this point. Like I just mentioned, Keenan Allen is ruled out, so that does hurt. But I think on the other side as well, we're still waiting on the full injury report for Indianapolis, but they are going to be without DeForest Buckner. The Colts defense are their number 1 pass rusher. Their rookie defensive end, Liatu Latu, is questionable for this game, so that is going to be crucial to keep an eye on. That last week, we saw Caleb Williams sort of running for his life. Now, Indy is a pretty good defense from a roster perspective. They still have a couple guys on that front line that can cause you problems. Grover Stewart specifically, along with Kwity Paye, that this is no slouch of a Colts defense, even if they are without Buckner and Latu. But I think that ultimately here, it's probably going to be a low-scoring game, and I think I'm just sort of riding with the best unit in this group, and that is the Chicago Bears defense. And, yes, Jonathan Taylor is great. He even acknowledged himself this past weekend that, he has a lot of room to grow in the passing game. I think that they're a little bit one-dimensional. Obviously, they do still have the deep ball, which is, a very scary thing as well. So it's not like you can entirely sell out to stopping that run game. I just feel like they're going to be able to sort of coax Anthony Richardson into making some poor decisions. And again, we're talking about the 5th pick here. Might get a little bit grimy and gritty, but I do think that the Bears are going to be able to pull this one out. So those are the 5. Just to sort of recap again, starting from top to bottom, we have the Ravens over the Cowboys on the road, the Lions covering -3 against the Cardinals, another game on the road there, the Steelers covering at home against the Chargers to go 3-0, covering -1.5 there, the Saints continuing to roll, covering that -2.5 against Philadelphia, and the Bears, essentially winning outright as +1 underdogs up to this point. But let me know what your opinions are on this upcoming week in the NFL. I think that we have a ton of very interesting games in store for us, so should be very exciting. But we are going to be switching gears here now and diving into what was an even bigger story than anything we got out of the NFL last night, and that is Shohei Ohtani making history, becoming the first player to ever hit 50 home runs and steal 50 bases in a single season. So we are going to be diving into this incredible mark for Ohtani and talking some big picture legacy stuff here as well for him. So we're going to be diving into all of that. But before we do so, we do have to take a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back.